This section is on the Persian Wars against the Greeks. Now, it's easy to think of the Persians and Greeks as being kind of separate, but one thing we need to emphasize is this. Remember that the Greeks send out colonies, right? They are colonizing other areas. A lot of Greek land was not particularly good at farming. Greek population was going up. People were looking for new opportunities. So the Greeks would do things like send out colonies. And modern day Turkey, called also Anatolia, is relatively sparsely populated. The Greeks, oftentimes there were people living here, but the Greeks were powerful enough basically to push them aside and establish their own settlements. So you have the establishment of Greek colonies here, including by Athens. At the same time, way over here in the east are the Persians. But the Persians are expanding west. So Greeks colonies expanding east, Persians expanding west. Eventually they run into each other, and the Persians are going to basically subdue these Greek colonies and make them a part of their empire. The Greeks don't much like that and eventually will rebel. And each little red fist you can see here is when they rebelled. And Athens felt close to its colonies. A lot of times a colony, the people of the colony were still considered citizens of the old city-state they were from, and so the Athenians helped. This made the Persians very angry, and after they had completed putting down these rebellions, they decided, hey, let's go get Athens. Before we talk, though, about how they tried to go get Athens, we need to talk a little bit about how the Persians and the Greeks were different. Now, one thing I have to emphasize here, in a lot of the wars we've talked about, a lot of the conflicts, it was mostly about power. You had one monarch fighting another monarch. They all agreed that monarchy was a good form of government and was the type of government you should have, right? It was mostly a struggle for power, which monarchy was going to be more powerful. But in the Persian Wars, we also see a struggle over ideology, over very different worldviews about how you should organize a state and a society. So on one side, the Persians were this multi-ethnic empire centered on an emperor. So there was a lot of vertical unity, but not necessarily horizontal unity. So we'll talk more about this later, but there were multiple different ethnic groups in the Persian Empire. You could have Arabs, you could have Ethiopians, you could have Egyptians, Amorites, lots of different types of people. They didn't necessarily feel any kinship with each other. What they shared was allegiance to the same emperor, the Persian emperor. So they had what we can think of as a vertical unity. It's not that the Ethiopians and the Arabs necessarily cared all that much about each other. They didn't even understand each other or feel they were part of the same culture, and they weren't. They were from different cultures. What held them together was their allegiance to a common emperor. The Greeks, though, remember, are not a shared government. They're a shared culture and civilization. So the Greeks will be fighting as an alliance of different states, but ones that share a horizontal cultural unity. Right? Remember we talked about how the Greeks are held together by things like military values as espoused in their literature, in the Olympics, in their shared religion, such as the Oracle of Delphi, which we'll talk about here. So this is a very different understanding of how to organize things. Right? The Persians, in many ways, were more tolerant, right? They were willing to respect and bring together a lot of different cultures, whereas the Greeks looked down on other cultures. Right? They called them barbarians. At the same time, though, we have to recognize that the Persians practice authoritarian rule. Right? The Persians practiced authoritarian rule. They told people what to do and they expected people to do it. Now, oftentimes they're relatively tolerant. They didn't necessarily try and push the people they ruled too far. They weren't the Assyrians. But they still told people what to do and expected people to do it. They were not believers in democracy. Power flowed from the king down. Flowed from the Persian emperor down. And to give you a sense of this, there's a story about one Persian emperor, and he wanted to reward a very good general by giving that general a new wife. And the problem was that general was already married and loved his wife and did not want a new wife. And the Persian emperor was like, no, 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 it's great. I'm going to give you a new wife. She's much better. You should totally take her. And the guy's like, but I'm happy with my wife. And the Persian emperor just wouldn't listen to the guy. So the general and his wife both committed suicide because they didn't want to be apart. And the Persian emperor just could not get it through his head that his general was happy and didn't want a new wife. But the Persian emperor was just used to telling people what to do, and they did it. How could someone not want a reward from me, the Persian emperor? The Greeks, though, had comparative self-rule. Again, as we talked about before, a lot of people were excluded. But when you compare it to the Persian government, in which you were told what to do by the emperor and expected to do it, in Greece there was a lot more equality. And people emphasized that the Greeks practiced slavery more, and certainly the Spartans did. But slavery still existed in the Persian Empire. It's just they had less of it than other cultures. There was a lot more equality in Greece and a lot more self-rule, at least among a select group. But it was still, like I said, comparatively larger. So you have different, very different understandings of what sort of government you should have. One that tells you what to do, or one in which a comparably large number of people decide what should be done. In a sense, you can think of the Persian Empire as large and loose, and the Greek civilization as small and compact. And I want to stress, this is a very important war. Because if the Persians destroy Greece, they subjugate Greece, that's the end of democracy. Democracy would just be a footnote in history. Why would you be democratic? The Greeks were democratic and they got eaten by the Persians. So this is very important. And it's therefore fitting, in a sense, that when the Persians they sent an envoy to the Athenians and said to the Athenians, okay, you need to surrender to us, and we will be merciful to you if you surrender. And what did the Athenians do? They had a vote. Right? The Athenians voted to decide, do we go to war against the Persians? Or do we accept losing our independence? And the Athenians voted to go to war, to fight for their democracy. So in the first Persian invasion, I think it's actually pronounced Darius, or Darius. People usually say Darius. I'm sorry, usually it's pronounced, I believe the correct pronunciation is Darius. There we go. So in 490 BC, King Darius is going to take his fleet and arrive in Greece and fight the Greeks in the Battle of Marathon. And I won't go into the story because it's very long and complex, but it is connected to a marathon, the 26.2 mile run. He's going to invade and fight the Greeks. Darius's army is more than twice the size of the Greek army. And also one thing I should point out, the Spartans were not there. They were undertaking a religious ceremony. They weren't allowed to fight during it, so they were not actually here. They tried to get there before the battle, but they weren't able to do so. So not only does Darius have an army twice the size of the Greek army, Greece is missing its best soldiers. What's striking is the Greeks will win the battle, and the official Greek count is they killed 6,000 Persians and lost 192 men. I've heard historians say, no, it's much more Greeks than that. But even on the high number, the Greeks, even though they had an army half the size of the Persians, killed twice as many Persians at the very least than Greeks were killed. And this is a contemporary Greek kind of imagining. And this was like a sculpture and someone copied it, but it was made around the time of the battle, after the battle, shortly after, which shows the Greeks here here's the Greeks pushing back the Persians all the way back to their boats. Now, why did the Greeks win this victory? One is they did really have good leadership. They did have a good general. They also had better equipment. The hoplite or hoplite, however you want to pronounce it, they were better equipped than Persians. Hoplite armor often included a lot of metal armor. The Persians had wicker shields and linen armor, typically. So the Greek soldiers were better outfitted. In general, as I mentioned earlier, hoplite formation, the phalanx wins on open ground. This was a flat area, so of course they're going to win. And also, I want to stress, the Greek soldiers fought very courageously. And I want to stress that also the Persians were not like wimps. They weren't cowards. They acquitted themselves well. The Persian army, I should say. Remember, the Persian army is multi-ethnic. They fought well. But they're there because the Persian emperor chose them to be there. If you're an Egyptian, you're kind of like, what does Greece have to do with me? But if you're the Greek soldiers who decided to be there, if you're an Athenian who cast your vote to be there, you're fighting for your home and you're fighting because you chose to be there. So guess what? You're going to fight harder. You're probably going to fight better. Now, here's the thing. Persia is an extraordinarily powerful empire. They just lost one battle. So why doesn't Darius try again? Why doesn't he just invade again? Well, this is a near contemporary kind of stele carving that shows the various people, the various ethnic groups that make up the Persian Empire. As you can see, it's very impressive. There's lots of different kinds of people in the Persian Empire. And the reason Darius didn't try again was because, where are they? This group of people, the Egyptians, rebelled. Remember, this is the problem. People oftentimes don't particularly like being part of an empire. They have to give their resources to, a lot of their resources, right? They have to pay taxes and tribute and give soldiers to fight in someone else's wars. Like I said, if you're an Egyptian, you're kind of like, what does Greece have to do with me? Greece is pretty far away from Egypt. What do I care about the Greeks? And it's kind of like, okay, the Persians lost a war, or lost a battle. Maybe now's a good time to rebel. So this is one of the problems, and this is what I meant about this, not about the kind of looseness of the Persian Empire. As long as the Persian Emperor is the biggest, scariest guy there is, everything's fine. But when the Persian Emperor loses, people might start looking at each other and saying, hey, maybe now's time to rebel. Maybe Egypt should be ruled by the Egyptians again, like we were for several thousand years before the Persians conquered us. Now, while Darius will not try again, Xerxes, who's a lot easier to pronounce, thank you, Xerxes, for not being Darius II. Xerxes is a lot easier to pronounce, and he will launch the second Persian invasion. And if you look at this map, you can see it's a very, very large-scale invasion. How large? He has to take part of his force over land, and part of it he has to take using his navy because it's so big. And it has to, if you have it all in one place, it'll eat all the food, and there's just not room for them to move. It would take hours, I think some people claim days, for the army to march past a specific point. So this is a huge invasion. Now, why does he do this? He wants to avenge his dad, right? His dad lost, he needs to do it. But he also needs to show, now that the Egyptian rebellion has been put down, he needs to show that the Persian Empire still has it, that the Persian Empire is still a force to be reckoned with, right? So he has to fight. He has to show the Persians are still strong, or else it's going to fall apart. So the Greeks know that they're coming. They have to get ready. Now, earlier I mentioned Leonidas, one of the kings of Sparta who's in the movie 300. And I do want to kind of note, again, I'm trying to go with this theme of patriotism to emphasize Greek values. And one reason why they win this war is that they understood themselves as fighting for their home. And remember we talked about the oracle? So the oracle was asked about Sparta becoming involved in this war, fighting back. And this is the oracle's answer. And it was, for you inhabitants of wide-wayed Sparta, either your great and glorious city must be wasted by Persian men, or if not, then the bound of Lacedaemon must mourn a dead king from Heracles' line. You may say, what? And what the oracle is saying is either the Persians will destroy your city or Leonidas will die. And this was the oracle that was given to Leonidas, who had a say in whether or not they were going to fight. But Leonidas, being patriotic, having a great love of Sparta, was happy to pay the cost, went off and led his soldiers, knowing that he would not be returning home. Now, this may have been a story that was told long after the battle, that maybe was not based in fact. My point here, rather, is just to emphasize how the Greeks valued patriotism, right? Leonidas is not going to battle because he thinks he'll particularly have a good afterlife. The Greeks usually believed in a very dull or very bad afterlife, even for heroes. He does it, though, out of love of his country. Right, so you have this Greek idea of patriotism. So Leonidas now will lead Spartan forces along with some allied forces to a place called Thermopylae. So if we look at this little map down here, right, the Persians have come all the way around here. They're getting to Thermopylae. And once they take Thermopylae, they can get to Athens and, of course, later to Sparta. It's not too difficult to go from there. And Xerxes is going to attack here. Now, this is modern day Thermopylae. The ocean would have actually been like right here. There's been sedimentation, so this is filled in. But the ocean would have been here. So you can see that Xerxes had a problem. If he wanted to advance to get to Athens and to get to Sparta, he had to go through this mountain pass. Right? He had to go through this mountain pass, the Pass of Thermopylae. And there are a Spartan and allied army in this pass, a hoplite army. Remember, we talked about the hoplite army. It's very, when it's in its phalanx formation, it's very difficult to get at. And for several days, Xerxes attacked the Spartans and their allies and could not defeat them. They simply could not move this phalanx out of the way. And I love it. There's this recorded exchange, again, who knows if it happened or not, but it sounds like something a Spartan would say, where the Persians threatened the Spartans and said, we will fire so many arrows that it will blot out the sun, right? There'll be so many arrows up in the sky falling on you Spartans that the sun will be blotted out. And supposedly a Spartan wag responded, wonderful, then we can fight in the shade. So the Spartans and their allies are fighting very well. The Greeks are holding off. However, a traitor will go to the Persians and say, you know what? There is a small pass, and if you go around it, you can get behind the Spartans and their allies and attack them, and then you can defeat them. And that's the thing. If you surround a phalanx, especially if you get it on all four sides, there's not much they can do. And the Persians will do that and defeat Leonidas and his allies. Leonidas will die, as do the Spartans and most of their allies. So this is a defeat, a very serious defeat for the Greeks. This is not good, because now the way to Athens and the way to Sparta is open.